Frodo turned and saw Strider, and yet not Strider, for the weather-worn ranger was no longer there. In the stern sat Aragorn, son of Arathorn, proud and erect, guiding the boat with skillful strokes. His hood was cast back, and his dark hair was blowing in the wind. A light was in his eyes, a king returning from exile to his own land.
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. Today we are reading Book 2, Chapter 9 of the Fellowship of the Ring, a chapter entitled The Great River. I am Zach.
My name's Logan.
Not going to lie, Logan, this chapter is not the most exciting chapter in the book.
Yeah, I sort of felt like, I don't know if this is really needed. Like maybe they could have tacked it on to the end of the last chapter.
Just fast traveled.
Some editing in the last chapter and a little bit of editing in this chapter, and we could have just had a longer chapter. But
yeah, I mean, let's see, how many pages is it in my edition? 380 to 394, so 14 pages. I mean, it's a boring trip for the hobbits and everyone else as well.
Yeah, that's true. Sam says he feels like luggage in this chapter because he doesn't have anything to do.
Yeah,
maybe that's how I felt reading it a little bit.
It's just like, oh, I mean, and this is how traveling long distances is. Like most of the time when you're traveling is not full of excitement.
Yeah, that's true.
Most journeys are mostly boring, but and there's just this practical need of, Tolkien has this map, and they need to travel a long distance, and it would take forever for them to walk this distance. I mean, this is basically the distance that Boromir travels, and it takes him like 100 days.
Right. Yeah. So I think they travel 10 days 10 days. Right. But I think, it's actually, as you were talking just now, there's a discussion about the way time flows in this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Sam is trying to figure out how long they were in Lorien.
Yeah.
And then they kind of go back and forth, and it's interesting because they were in Lorien, and they're like, "Were we there 3 days, or were we there a month?"
Yeah, they kind of can't decide.
And time almost feels like it's static there, but then there's this real contrast in this chapter where it's like 10 days on the river, and it's just like mind numbing.
Feels like forever. Time is stretched out.
Right, and so I like that contrast between where they just were and then where they are now, and how different it is. And the trees are failing, and there's these sort of like rolling hills on one side and blasted lands and all that kind of stuff.
I mean, it's not quite true that nothing happens in this chapter.
That's true.
Like we get Gollum kind of reintroduces himself into the story. The pursuit of Gollum is kind of just like fully acknowledged, whereas before it was kind of just hinted at.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a necessary part of the story. They get some arrows shot at them by orcs. I mean, like the breaking of the fellowship could have just as easily happened here, if not for the fact that Legolas has this moment of like extreme badassery.
Yeah.
In shooting down a fell beast.
Right.
And then we also get the development of Aragorn and Boromir into kind of their final states. So there are some like really necessary moments that happen here. I think like you can kind of plot Boromir's descent into madness.
Yeah.
Really started, I mean, it's always been there, but it really started in Lorien.
Yeah.
And he starts to kind of show his true intentions in Lorien, but here you can kind of see him get more and more agitated.
Yeah.
In a way that really foreshadows his eventual turn. Maybe we could even say the turn actually happened back in the Lorien chapters, but you start to see a change in his personality here. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we have Aragorn's ascent into his kingly, noble state.
Yeah, guise or whatever, right? His truth of who he is.
Yeah, and it's like you said, it's it's a reflection on time. It's a reflection on fate. For Tolkien, after Lord of the Rings became, well regarded and widely read, a lot of people wrote to him asking, like, what's Lord of the Rings about?
Mm-hmm.
And what they're always getting at is like, what is this an allegory for?
Yeah.
Like, is it about World War II? Is it about atomic energy? Is Sauron Hitler? People really wanted it to be allegorical.
Yeah.
And he always pushed against that. But what he said was, when pressed, he said that Lord of the Rings is about death. And it's like this extended reflection on the decay of the natural world, that everything is subject to entropy.
Mm-hmm.
Like everything is decayed and decaying over time. And that, even the elves, who are immortal, they still experience time, but for them, it's like a weariness because they know that they're not going to die, but everything around them does die.
Mm-hmm.
And with that comes this weariness, this almost like depression.
Yeah, or like ennui, I think, is maybe one way to describe it. That
That's a great way to put it. Yes. Yeah.
they have this like detached, disinterested way of interacting with the world because they've kind of seen it all and they
Yeah.
don't expect anything new to happen necessarily.
Like Galadriel calls it, fighting the long defeat.
Yeah.
And so there's a pessimism to Tolkien that I think, like, as like kind of like modern readers, we tend to have this idea of like progressivism. It's like things are getting better as time goes on. And that's just not how Tolkien saw the world.
Uh-huh.
He saw the world as fallen, and that everything was subject to decay, and over time everything just reaches a state of brokenness apart from grace. So for the elves, it's like they're still in the flow of time. Like Aragorn kind of corrects everyone as they're kind of discussing like the passage of time in Lorien, and he's like, no, they're not outside of the flow of time.
Yeah, he sort of says it's more like they're a persistent ripple in a stream.
Yeah, that time like moves, like the changing of the seasons are like ripples over a body of water. And they just experience it differently because for them, time moves both fast and slow.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's fast because everything around them decays and dies much quicker than they do.
Right.
But it's slow because they have this like weight of knowing that they're going to go on while everything around them fades. And that weariness is ultimately why they leave Middle Earth.
Yeah.
It's why they have to go west, to the Undying Lands, because
Uh-huh.
staying in Middle Earth where everything decays is a weariness for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Time, to mark the passage of time, requires like a structure of meaning, I think.
Mm.
From a human perspective, I can't really speak for elves, but from a human perspective, the aspect of progress on one side or decay on the other are, I think, lenses through which we view time. So, if we talk about like progressivism, there's like some ideal future that we're striving toward
Yeah.
that is kind of, in order for meaning to function, that ideal has to proceed away from us at the same or similar distance at all times.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Tolkien is certainly not in that camp.
No.
But I also think it's equally true to say that viewing the world as essentially a vision of entropy and decay is also a structure of meaning.
Yeah.
That there was an ideal past
Right.
which we either which we grieve, I guess. or in, some more, I guess, modern conservative versions, which we try to reclaim, which is really a kind of like liberalism. but
Right.
but I think that like time always exists in that. And so like like when you're in Lorien, there's really not a striving for the past or a I mean, there's less of a grief about the past passing away because it feels so stable and it's sustained, right, by Galadriel.
Right.
And they're not really concerned about the future. And so it makes sense that, a month passes and maybe it feels like 3 days.
Yeah.
And then when you're like literally in the, you're like literally in a stream for 10 days, you can't help but feel time pass because of the passage of geography and that kind of thing. So
Exactly.
yeah, there's really an interesting kind of philosophical thing happening in this chapter.
Yeah.
Beyond the kind of, plotting of the plot, which is not super interesting until kind of the end of the chapter. But
Right. Yeah. So I do think it's a brief interlude in the story where it's like there's the practical need of them getting from point A to point B. Like they need to move south on the map.
Right.
And Tolkien can't spend 100 days to do it.
Right.
And so this is maybe the closest thing to Tolkien moving the story along at the speed of plot, where, like in other stories, they would just, get in a teleportation device and be there, or they would get in a speed of light travel.
Yeah, hit the warp
ship and hit warp speed. Exactly. So this is probably the closest thing in the story to that. But even within it is the practical, logistical mind of Tolkien, where it's like he has to create a means for them to move quickly that fits within the rules of the world that he's established. But he also introduces this interesting like digression on the way that different beings in Middle Earth perceive the passage of time.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And yeah, I think it has a lot to do with movement as well. Like, in Lorien, they are static.
Yeah.
They don't go anywhere and they don't want to go anywhere.
Yeah.
But here they're moving and they're seeing a change of the geography, and that creates a different sense of time.
Right. They have to be told to leave, Lorien. Like they're like, all right, it's time for you guys to get out of here. And I think they would have stayed longer, if they could have.
Absolutely.
It also occurs to me that Middle Earth is a place.
Yeah.
For Tolkien, certainly.
Yeah.
It really is a place. And so he's like, why not? Or there's part of me, I guess, that's like, why not like luxuriate in being in this place? I think there are things about this chapter that could be condensed into like 5 paragraphs,
Yeah.
Couple vignettes, a vision of this and that,
and then they traveled for 10 days on the river. It's like,
they traveled,
really
they saw this at one point, Sam saw Gollum, they saw these big statues, yada, yada. And that's the introduction to the breaking of the fellowship, But since Middle Earth is a place, and it really feels like a place, but way before now, right? Like, Tolkien's spent all this time making it feel like a place. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cool that we get to like hang out there, with like our buddy Frodo.
Yeah. It kind of reminds me of, and we talked about this in earlier episodes, how the pace shifts from the first few chapters of the book, and then once they get to Rivendell, it just moves. No, I guess after the Council of Elrond, it just moves really quickly.
Yeah,
like a lot of exciting plot elements happen, and there's a few exciting things in this chapter, but for the most part, it kind of has more of the pace of the first 2, 3, 4 chapters of book 1. Where it's like, okay, we've gone through 3 or 4 chapters, and it's only been 5 days.
Right.
So there's like a lengthening of the timeline, like a slowing of the pace, which maybe we needed that in this stage. Maybe Tolkien was like, all right, let's pump the brakes.
Yeah. remember that we're on a long journey. It's not all just happening in some small geographical area. It's this huge journey away from the Shire and what the hobbits are comfortable with.
But yeah, by the time we reach the end of this chapter, we are essentially at the foot of the land of Mordor. Like we are essentially there. And, the rest of the book, which is, we're about a third of the way through the text now. The rest of the book really, like, all the action kind of happens for Frodo and Sam, at least, in this region that we get to by the end of this chapter. So what do you think? You want us to kind of jump into the text? I think it's interesting, like, they're in these boats, and it says they were content that the decision, which they must make at the latest when they came to Ralros in the Tinned Rock Isle, still lay some days ahead, and they let the river bear them at its own pace, having no desire to hasten towards the perils that lay beyond, whichever course they took in the end. So, like, right from the beginning, they are still kind of dreading this choice they have to make. And kind of the two advocates for each choice are Boromir and Aragorn. Boromir wants them to divert west and go to Gondor and strike out from a position of power, military power. And Aragorn is less keen on that. And it seems like he is really advocating for them just to go east, to straight to Mordor. And once again, if you look at the map, you can kind of see where they end up is basically like directly in between those two choices. And so there's like this like physical need to turn left or right. There's like a fork in the road, a fork in the path. And you can kind of see Boromir getting increasingly more desperate in his pleas. Before it was like kind of in hints, and he's trying to be subtle. As time goes on, he starts pulling out all the stops, even to the point of like getting emotional and like questioning whether they really care about him as a person and his contribution to the company in a way that's really manipulative. And he kind of comes across as like a controlling boyfriend, or it's not a good look for Boromir.
Yeah, there's like an anger and sort of mixed with anxiety there. Insecurity. He really wants to be in control, but the company is certainly following Aragorn, and Frodo would probably follow Aragorn wherever.
Yes.
I wonder at this point if Aragorn had said, let's go to Minas Tirith, if Frodo just would have followed along.
Yeah.
But I'm not 100% sure about that, but it's a question I have. And so Boromir's so frustrated. And I don't think Boromir's used to people questioning him,
Yeah. He's the son of the Steward of Gondor.
Right. He's like this prince, basically, and a military commander and all the rest.
Yeah.
And so,
a leader of men.
Yeah. So that's what he expects. But yeah, he gets more and more desperate as the chapter goes on. I was really sick of him by the end of this chapter. Shut up, Boromir.
Yeah. We can kind of imagine, even though we don't get his true thoughts spoken out loud until the next chapter, you can kind of imagine his internal dialogue becoming more and more controlled by his desire to take the ring.
Yeah.
Like the ring-induced monologue, the way that the ring takes what you want and twists it and magnifies it, is probably getting louder and louder in his own head. Mm-hmm. And so he has fewer inhibitions as time goes on, and that madness starts to leak out into his actions. He's biting his nails. He's staring at Frodo in a way that other people start to notice it. And the tension is just kind of increasingly rising until it boils over the next chapter. Mm-hmm. But there's this line here that I wanted to read. It says, There was little speech and no laughter in any of the boats. Each member of the company was busy with his own thoughts. So they're all bored, but they're also becoming more and more interior.
Mm-hmm.
There's no laughter, there's no lightness. As they get closer and closer to Mordor, they have this heaviness that is on them. And it's partly just because they're going into danger, but it's also because of the spiritual power of Sauron. Like, that's what Sauron does. He has subjugated this land, and there's a heaviness over it. Like, whenever Aragorn and Gimli and Legolas chase after Merry and Pippin, Aragorn says out loud, like, there is some like power that is chasing after us, and that power is like the spiritual will of Sauron, who just leeches your hope, leeches your joy away from you, and that is physically felt in this as they go further and further south.
Yeah, and we get a description of the clouds in the south, and on the other side, more light, and I think that kind of in the landscape you can kind of see where is Sauron's power and where are lands that are still freer from his influence.
Right. Description of Boromir here I think is really telling. Boromir sat muttering to himself, sometimes biting his nails as if some restlessness or doubt consumed him, sometimes seizing a paddle and driving the boat close behind Aragorn's. Then Pippin, who sat in the bow looking back, caught a queer gleam in his eye as he peered forward, gazing at Frodo. Yeah, so he's starting to lose it.
Boromir he's intermittently having these little fits where he's just like so angry that he's rushing up to Aragorn, and then falling back, and then rushing up to Aragorn again.
Yeah.
You kind of imagine a kid who's like on a hike that they don't want to be on a hike.
Yeah.
So they sort of start, lagging behind and then running forward and kicking rocks and stuff like that. That's Boromir here.
So Sam has started to get used to the boats. They're not as bad as what he thought they were growing up. They're not exactly the death trap that he was led to believe.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, folks, Frodo's parents died on boats.
Yeah.
And that was a source of good gossip in the first chapter, that they shouldn't have gone, doing something as foolish as getting into a boat. I mean, a boat is just about the worst thing that you could imagine being in.
Yeah.
And Sam was like, Sam had long ago made up his mind that though boats were maybe not as dangerous as he'd been brought up to believe, they were far more uncomfortable than even he had imagined. He was cramped and miserable, having nothing to do but stare at the winterlands crawling by and the gray water on either side of him. Even when the paddles were in use, they did not trust Sam to use one.
Poor Sam.
He's just luggage. But because of that, his eyes are peeled, and that's when he starts to see Gollum. He sees a log with eyes. And we get this really interesting scene where Sam, he says, like, essentially, like, I had a dream, but I don't think it's a dream. And
sort
Frodo's like,
daydreaming, yeah.
Yeah, Frodo's like, I have felt like there was something following us for a long time. He says, I should make nothing of it but a log in the dusk and sleep in your eyes, Sam, if this was the first time that those eyes had been seen, but it isn't. I saw them away back north before we reached Lorien. And that's when Sam is pretty much like, I've been thinking a lot about Mr. Bilbo's stories, and I think I might know what this log with eyes is.
Yeah.
And he says it out loud. He says Gollum.
Yeah, it's interesting that Sam can recognize Gollum from Bilbo's stories.
Yeah.
Maybe a little comment from Tolkien about the importance and power of stories.
Yeah. As a means of like transmitting important information.
Yeah, it's important to know who this guy is, and it became really important, here. I love that, you're deep in thought and you just stare off into the distance.
Yeah.
That Sam is sort of in that spot where there's actually, and I think this has been documented, there's actually like a brainwave thing that happens. Like your brainwaves get like longer when you're in that sort of state. It's not exactly daydreaming, but maybe it is daydreaming. But he's sort of in that just where you're just thinking and staring off into the distance.
Yeah.
unfocused,
Yeah.
but he still perceives this oddness, and he sort of has to like shake himself awake and figure out what's going on. It's such a,
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just such a human kind of description.
Yeah, he's just luggage, but he's luggage with eyes.
Yeah, I love that. I would say luggage with eyes. Frodo's always kind of, Sam's kind of self-deprecating, but Frodo's not about that. He's like, no, Sam, like you have as much worth as anybody in this company.
Yeah, you're not just luggage. You have
Right.
eyes, and
Yeah.
you can use them. So they decide to kind of set up without telling anybody else. They decide to set up a watch, and Sam takes first watch, but then with nothing happening. But Frodo takes the second watch, and like right when he's about to fall asleep, he sees these eyes coming in, and it says it's just a yard away from him in the darkness.
Right,
So
right there.
And so he pulls out his sword, and that stirs Aragorn. Aragorn's like, something disturbed my sleep, which I think is interesting, right? He's like
so keyed into his environment that he.
Yeah, I feel a disturbance in the Force. Like he's like,
yeah.
Why have you drawn your sword? He says, and Frodo answers, Gollum, or at least so I guess. He says, so you know about our little footpad, do you? He's like, he's slippery as a fish. We tried to shake him, but he's too clever a waterman. So Gollum, he is he's skilled at being in the water. He's like as comfortable in the water as a fish.
He's kind of turned into like an amphibian, and he's often kind of depicted that way in art, and I think that's really really good because he's got these like big paddles for feet and hands, and he's sort of slimy and green, and
exactly.
And so the fact that he's like a frog man that can keep up with you no matter what you do, so certainly on the water.
Yeah, you can't shake him. I thought this was interesting here. He basically tells Aragorn tells Frodo to go back to sleep. He says, you lie down now and I'll keep watch for what's left of the night. He says, I wish I could lay my hands on the wretch. So he's like, basically like, I want to kill him. But then he says, we might make him useful. What do you think that's about?
Something about maybe like trying to get information from him or something like that? Or
I highlighted it here in my book. He says, we might make him useful, but if I cannot, we shall have to try and lose him. He's very dangerous. He may put an enemy that is about on our track. Yeah. So that's a little bit of foreshadowing where one question that I have is like, okay, is the reason why the orcs find them here in a couple pages because Gollum has kind of alerted the enemy to their presence? And I think that's kind of left up to interpretation. Yeah. The fact that, it's mentioned a couple times makes me want to say that that's Tolkien pretty heavily hinting that Gollum did alert the orcs to the presence of the company, either intentionally or not.
Yeah, right.
But I highlighted we might make him useful because I wonder if Aragorn himself is thinking we might be able to use him as a guide.
Yeah, because he knows that Gollum has spent time, in and around Mordor.
And Aragorn is not.
Yeah, and Aragorn hasn't. And that becomes apparent in a couple places where Aragorn's like, "Oh, geez, we like travel further than I thought, and I don't exactly know where I am." And and so if we could get Gollum to kind of agree to guide us, then that might be a good thing. Which that ends up being pretty key to the success of the whole quest.
I mean, maybe that was part of Gandalf's plan. He tells Frodo essentially like, hey, don't be so quick to say you want to kill Gollum because he might have a role to play in this. And it's not defined what that role is, but it seems like Aragorn here also is kind of like, this little sucker might be useful down the road. So I want to wring his neck, but he might make a useful guide, I guess, which that's always been kind of a head scratcher for me. Like Frodo choosing to take on Gollum as like his servant and his guide. So I was kind of like, why would I wouldn't do that if I was in Frodo's shoes. I always wondered that, but it's like, oh, maybe he's just, well, I mean, he is pretty explicitly following the wisdom of Gandalf, but it seems like Aragorn is kind of on the same like thought wave here.
Well, Gollum has information that no one else has that isn't an orc, right? About this landscape. And it's even though Gollum is this dangerous, kind of twisted creature, he's like easier to talk to than an orc would be.
Right.
Maybe.
Right. We get another little foreshadowing just before this where Aragorn lay in their camp, wondering if Gollum had been doing some mischief, and the news of their voyage was now moving in the wilderness. Basically, right after he worries about that, they start getting shot by arrows.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting.
And so this is like from the Mordor side of the river, they start getting shot at, and Frodo gets one right between the shoulders. He's the only person that gets hit.
Yeah, it bounces off him.
But I think, he was shot for a reason. He's targeted.
Interesting.
It was right between his shoulders.
Yeah,
but the arrow fell back, foiled by the hidden coat of his meat. So
I didn't think of that, but that makes sense to me. It's not just random, maybe.
They're being hunted, and they're being hunted by, informed parties.
Yeah.
They know who they are and what they have. I think it's interesting that Frodo is the only one that gets hit directly by an arrow. And I think it's also telling that Sam says Gollum's doing I'll be bound. So, Aragorn and Sam both are heavily, this is the third implication that Gollum has given away their position.
Does Gollum know at this point that Frodo has the ring?
I think so.
Okay.
I think so. I think he is looking for a Baggins. He knows he's a hobbit.
Think he recognizes Sting? Because Bilbo uses in the Hobbit. Bilbo uses Sting as like a light.
Yes, he does.
But I'm not sure.
And he's carrying it when he encounters Gollum. That's a great question.
So they have to paddle away.
In desperation,
as hard as they can to get away from these orcs. I like that it says stroke by stroke they labored on. So they're not just floating anymore.
No.
The pace really picks up here.
And it says, in the darkness, it was hard to be sure that they were indeed moving at all. But slowly the swirl of the water grew less, and the shadow of the eastern bank faded back into the night. So it's dark. It's dark, and they really probably shouldn't be paddling recklessly in the dark like this.
Yeah.
But they make their way to a shore, the western shore. So this is the shore, the Gondor side of the shore. And Legolas is so freaking cool here.
Yeah.
Like, this is Legolas's shining moment, I think. They make their way to the western shore, and it says, Legolas laid down his paddle and took up the bow that he had brought from Lorien. Then he sprang ashore and climbed a few paces up the bank. Stringing the bow and fitting an arrow, he turned, peering back over the river into the darkness. Across the water, there were shrill cries, but nothing could be seen. Frodo looked up at the elf standing tall above him, as he gazed into the night, seeking a mark to shoot at. His head was dark, crowned with sharp white stars that glittered in the black pools of the sky behind. But now rising and sailing from the south, the great clouds advanced, sending out dark outriders into the starry fields. A sudden dread fell on the company. Elbereth Gilthoniel, sighed Legolas as he looked up. Even as he did so, a dark shape like a cloud, and yet not a cloud, for it moved far more swiftly, came out of the blackness in the south, and sped toward the company, blotting out all light as it approached. Soon it appeared as a great winged creature, blacker than the pits of the night.
And the orcs sort of cheer. Fierce voices rose up to greet it from across the water. And then Frodo feels a chill run through him. He clutches his heart, and there was this deadly cold, like the memory of an old wound in his shoulder.
So that makes me think this is the Witch King of Angmar.
Yeah.
I think this is the Nazgul who stabbed Frodo on Weathertop.
Mm-hmm.
And he's riding an evil creature. It's not a bird. It's not a dragon.
Yeah, it's
even though.
What did you say earlier? Pterodactyl. It's like a dinosaur, kind of.
Yeah, we get a pretty sick description of the fell beast when Eowyn has her moment.
Yeah,
and it's like an ancient beast that had been fed foul meats, and it stinks, and it's got wings, but it doesn't have feathers. It has pinions with like a membrane stretched across them like a bat.
Yeah.
And there's a great letter where somebody who pretty early on just read Lord of the Rings really like deeply and intelligently. Tolkien loved this letter because he was just like, "Hey, you are like my kind of guy.
That's
Like,
awesome. Oh,
like
cool.
you're asking the kind of questions that I wish I've been asked."
Yeah.
He's like, most of the time people are asking me really dumb questions like, "Is this Adolf Hitler?" And he's like, "No, like ask me about like the fell beast." But the person asked like, "Is this a pterodactyl?"
Yeah.
And Tolkien was basically like, "Yeah."
Oh, I love it. That's so cool. I I've seen, paintings where it's just straight up a pterodactyl.
Yeah.
And it's kind of goofy,
Yeah.
frankly. Like maybe 30 years ago or something or longer, it would have been like cooler, but now it's kind of like, that's a little bit goofy. But
Yeah.
I kind of love the idea that it's like a dinosaur,
It's
Well,
a
and
dinosaur.
pterodactyls are technically not dinosaurs, I guess, but
Is that
um
right?
yeah, there's something else.
All
But
right, I trust you.
what is a dinosaur? I mean, it's all just science mumbo jumbo. But
Big old chickens.
yeah, but I kind of like that. There's something sort of charming about the idea that it's a pterodactyl. Um,
It's an ancient, like, from another time,
yeah, it's
from the
alien.
depths of time.
Right,
It's
right.
exactly.
Like
It's
a living
alien,
fossil.
but
Yeah,
it's actually been here longer than we have. And
right,
Sauron, through his magic, has found a way to keep these just wretched things alive.
right.
But I think this is almost certainly being ridden by the Witch King of Angmar, who is really, he's the closest thing to a bad guy, like antagonist. I mean, Sauron is the antagonist of the story, but we
Yeah.
never see Sauron. He's described, he's felt.
Mm-hmm.
We even get a physical description of Sauron from Gollum
Oh yeah.
pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he describes his hands, and so Gollum has like been in the presence of Sauron, which is, from all accounts, overwhelmingly terrifying. Just to be in the presence of Sauron would like make you go insane.
Yeah.
So the Witch King of Angmar is really kind of the like embodiment of evil that we get, like the main kind of bad guy that we get. So I think it's interesting that he brushes up against Frodo multiple times in the story. He literally stabs Frodo in the shoulder,
Yeah.
and now he's here. He's here to, he met them at the ford and was thwarted
Mm-hmm.
by the magic of that place, Rivendell, and by Elrond's power, and he's back, and he's got himself a new ride.
Right. He's not just on a horse anymore either. Right. He's on
Yeah,
this weird creature.
fell beast.
Well, beast, but Legolas takes care of it.
Yeah, Legolas is like, all right, everybody get behind me.
He's also got a super bow now from, he doesn't just have his little Mirkwood bow. He's got like a super long bow from Lothlorien.
I thought it was interesting that he like gets out. It's almost like this like fluid motion, which, like that's like Legolas in a nutshell. He's just moving effortlessly.
Yeah.
But he like paddles the boat, jumps out of the boat, sets the paddle down, and it says that he strings the bow and fits an arrow to it. So like the bow, like the string of the bow, like I never really thought of this, but I guess if you're traveling with a bow, you don't have the tension on the bow all the time.
Yeah. You don't keep it under tension. Right.
So he like kind of like in one motion puts the elf hair, string
Right.
to the bow, pulls that arrow off his quiver, fits it, and is just like ready to go, like looking for his shot.
And even with all this, we still have time for Frodo to look up at him and sort of see him as like an elven prince.
Yeah, exactly.
His head is sort of ringed by the stars behind him, kind of become
Yeah.
like a crown.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, really cool. Really cool.
His head was dark, crowned with sharp white stars.
Yeah, and then he like shoots this thing. It's night. The thing is, he can only see it because it's darker than the night. It's like a shadow in the like
Yeah.
against the sky.
Do you want to read the description of him shooting the heck out of this thing?
Yeah, suddenly the great bow of Lorien sang. Shrill went the arrow from the elven string. Frodo looked up. Almost above him, the winged shape swerved. There was a harsh croaking scream as it fell out of the air, vanishing down into the gloom of the eastern shore. The sky was clean again. There was a tumult of many voices far away, cursing and wailing in the darkness, and then silence. Neither shaft nor cry came again from the east that night.
Yeah.
It almost, even though the company feels this dread, which is a long time ago, we talked about how that's one of the things the Nazgul do is they make this like awful foreboding feeling, kind of emanates off of them. But Legolas not only shoots down this beast, but also kind of like stops the orcs because the orcs, they like can't believe it, that this even though they were cheering before, and now they're like, oh geez, now these guys just like shot this thing down.
It's like holy, it's like it's not supposed to happen that way. Like this is their super weapon, this air force.
They're not gonna cross the water. It kind of like creates this separation between the company and these orcs in a way.
Yeah, this shot is like a legendary shot. Merry and Pippin hear the orcs from Isengard making fun of the orcs from Mordor because they're like, oh yeah, I mean that winged terror from the sky that you guys had seems like it was taken care of pretty easily by these people that we defeated in battle.
Yeah, right.
So yeah, maybe you guys are not as big and bad as you think. This makes waves. This single bow shot, Legolas becomes like renowned.
Yeah.
Among the orcs.
It also causes Gimli, who obviously he's had his like moment with the elves. He's feeling really different about the elves than he did, just a few days ago.
Yeah.
But he says, "Praised be the bow of Galadriel and the hand and eye of Legolas. That was a mighty shot in the dark, my friend." And I mean, this is while he's eating elvish lembas. So like all of a sudden, like Gimli is like a total fanboy for the elves. I just love it. It's so great.
He's like, hell yeah, Legolas.
Yeah.
It's like, you shot the hell out of that thing.
Mess him up, Legolas. You got him.
Hold me back. Hold me back.
So great.
Hold my limbos.
Such a cute. I mean, it's just such a cute like character moment from Gimli.
Is this the first time that he calls Legolas his friend?
Yeah, it might be.
It's they were called fast friends last chapter, but
but neither of them has actually said it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Hell yeah. But Legolas is like, but who can say what it hit? It was a mighty shot, but who can say what it hit? And Gimli's like, I didn't like that thing. It reminded me of the shadow in Moria, the shadow of the Balrog. He's corrected by Frodo. He's like, it wasn't a Balrog. The Balrog's power was in heat. This evil's power was in cold.
Interesting. Yeah. Frodo says Frodo's going to say, I think it was, and I think he was going to say, I think it was a Nazgul.
A Nazgul or a Black Rider or
a Black Rider or whatever, but he stops himself. And then Boromir's like, what do you think?
Boromir's itchiness is coming out again here.
It's like, no, I'm not going to say. He's trying to catch a glimpse of Frodo's face.
Right.
I think maybe he's looking for Frodo to be too afraid, to continue, or
he's almost like, we should like get going in Minas Tirith, right?
Pretty scary, huh? You wouldn't want to go see another one of those, would you? Yeah.
You don't want to go over that way, right? I mean, because that way, like they just came from that way. We're not going to go back that way, right?
Yeah.
Then we get this, reflection on time, which I think we don't need to spend too much time talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But Sam, he's noticed that the moon isn't the way that he expects it to be. It's a new moon.
Right.
And he says basically like it looks like the paring of a nail, which I think is a really fun metaphor. Like it looks like a toenail.
Yeah.
And he calls it like the rind of the new moon. So it's like you imagine like a melon rind,
right?
Or like a the rind of a pumpkin or something like that. So this is a new moon is like the sliver of a moon.
Right.
And that's how Sam is like, hey, like something weird happened with time. Now, if we were writing this story and we just had a like very exciting encounter with the enemy, would we stop midstream to do a couple pages on how weird time moves in Lorien?
Yeah, like a philosophical investigation of the way time moves for elves and in Lorien, and and conjecture about how much time has passed. And no, I don't think so. I think that this is an opportunity for the action to keep rising. But that's just not how Tolkien rolls. It's not how he rolls.
I don't want to spend I don't want to tarry too long on this subject, but Sam he basically says like, all right, this moon math doesn't add up.
Yeah.
Frodo says, in that land maybe we were in time that is elsewhere long gone by. It was not, I think, until Silverlord bore us back into Anduin that we returned to the time that flows through mortal lands. And he's corrected by Legolas, who would know a thing or two about how elf time works. He says, nay, time does not tarry ever. So he's like, you weren't out of time. He says, but change and growth is not in all things and places alike. So he's like, time moves differently in different places. Legolas says, for the elves, the world moves, and it moves both very swift and very slow. Swift because they themselves change little, and all else fleets by it. It is a grief to them. Slow because they need not count the running years, not for themselves. The passing seasons are but ripples ever repeated in the long, long stream. Yet beneath the sun, all things must wear to an end at last. So that's Tolkien's philosophy in a nutshell. I mean, he said essentially that's what Lord of the Rings is about.
Wear to an end at last.
That's the Lord of the Rings is about death and decay. And maybe he was being a little cheeky. Like, of course, Lord of the Rings is about lots of other things. It's about hope. It's about friendship. It's about, good triumphing over evil. It's about all those things. Right. It's about the way that war corrupts.
Right.
But at its base, he said Lord of the Rings was about decay. Let me get this line from Frodo. He says, but the wearing is slow in Lorien. The power of the lady is on it. Rich are the hours, though short they seem, where Galadriel wields the elven ring. There goes a little bit of ba 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 ba.
A little bit of poetry.
A little bit of elven poetry language, just like kind of like finding its way into prose again. And then Aragorn chides him. He says, that should not have been said outside of Lorien, not even to me. So Frodo has this knowledge of the ring that Galadriel wields, but not everybody knows that. And he's like,
that's interesting.
Like, hey, don't say that in these parts.
Aragorn's like, that's a secret, Frodo. You keep that to yourself.
Yeah.
You don't need to be spreading that around when there's like literally orcs on the other side of the river from us.
Yeah. Loose lips sink ships. And maybe don't go saying that in the land of Mordor. Sam says, I can't abide fog, but this seems to be a lucky one. Now perhaps we get away without these cursed goblins seeing us. You want to talk about the word goblin? I don't think we've talked about this on the pod.
Yeah, so goblin is what the orcs in The Hobbit are called.
Right.
When they're crossing the Misty Mountains, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The Goblin King. And
they accidentally camp on the front doorstep of the Goblin City.
I mean, it was an honest mistake.
Yeah, right. And
haven't we all, camped in the doorway of a Goblin King?
When giants are throwing boulders at you, you make rash decisions. And that I think they're called goblins throughout. I don't believe we get the word orc in The Hobbit at all.
I could be wrong. I think that the word orc is used one time in The Hobbit.
Oh, is that right? That's interesting. Yeah. So orcs and goblins
or I could be misremembering and it's not used at all, but the word goblin is used intentionally
right
in The Hobbit instead of his preferred word which was orc.
Do you know why Tolkien made that choice?
So,
I mean, a goblin is more. When I think of a goblin, I think of something more from like folklore and less from Lord of the Rings.
Right.
So maybe that's
Goblin
what he was gesturing toward. But
goblin is a word that people in Tolkien's time would have known, and he didn't have to spend a lot of time explaining what a goblin was.
And kids would have known what it is.
Yeah. Goblins are bad guys in lots of stories, and
yeah,
you can kind of picture what a goblin looks like without giving a lot of explanation. Orc is a much older word, and it was Tolkien's preferred word. And that's why he introduces it in Lord of the Rings. And we don't really get the word goblin used very, very much. It's used several times in the story, but this is one of the few times that a character refers to an orc as a goblin. But I do think it's interesting that Sam is the one who does it, because Sam is kind of the more common. He's a commoner, so he's going to use more like colloquial speech.
Yeah.
And so it's like a lower version of the word. And if we think of The Hobbit as being written by a hobbit for hobbits,
right,
the word that he would use would be goblin. So I think it's an interesting little nod to The Hobbit, but also to kind of Sam's station.
I like that we get Legolas's Elvish word for orcs too, which is yerk.
Yeah, and we get that in Moria as well.
Right, and so, but I like that, there's like a similarity between the word orc and yerk, or
you can kind of see how yerk. Like, yes,
YRCH. It's even kind of hard to like conceptualize how you would say it, but like it still sounds enough like orc that you can like see that they're related to each other. I love that, etymologically, like just his like, Tolkien's main jam was that.
Yeah. He loved morphology. He loved like tracking how words change over time.
It's so cool when that kind of makes it into the text. It's just his like passion is there.
One of his first jobs at Oxford was to work on the Oxford English Dictionary. And one of my favorite Tolkien fun facts that's just rattling around in my brain, just waiting to come out at the slightest provocation, is that he worked on the word W, and one of the words that he found textual usage of is the word waggle.
Waggle, really?
Yeah,
that's fascinating. So he found like an early attribution of waggle.
Yeah, like as much as he could find, he would just read.
Fascinating.
Looking for the word waggle.
That's a good tidbit for sure. I'll have to go look up the Oxford English Dictionary definition of waggle after this.
Yeah, look up the OED waggle and you'll see a little bit of Tolkien's earliest published writing.
Yeah, cool.
Boromir starts to show his colors here. The desperation starts to come out. In my, we're just a few pages from the end of the chapter here, but in my notes I have Boromir's downfall written in big letters with a arrow going down this page. Sam essentially says, hopefully we can get away from these goblins. And Boromir's response to that is essentially, I do not see why we should pass the rapids or follow the river any further. If the Immenwheel lie before us, then we can abandon these cockle boats and strike westward and southward until we come to the Entwash and cross into my own land. Aragorn says, we can if we are making for Minas Tirith, but that is not yet agreed. Mm-hmm. So they still have this choice leaning over them, and Boromir is like, hey, let's get out of these stupid boats and strike west from here.
Yeah, directly toward where I want to be.
And I think it's interesting he calls them cockle boats. Like, he's dismissive of this gift, which has saved them months of hard travel.
Certainly months. Yeah.
He's just so disrespectful to the gift of the elves. He calls them cockle boats. And we're given a description of these boats later. It's like they're strong, they're light. Even the hobbits can lift them on their own.
Yeah.
And they're able to carry heavy people and their luggage over long distances.
Merry and Pippin can carry their boat by them, just the two of them by themselves.
Yeah.
They're like amazing. But Boromir is anything that doesn't come from Minas Tirith, he's not about it. He's such a nationalist. He just has this sort of closed off way of seeing the world. And he wants to get what he wants here. So he's like, let's leave this boat. Let's let's get out of here, you know?
Ultimately, he wants the ring. And he's starting
Yeah.
to show that more and more. Like, if he can just get them to Minas Tirith, and this may not be fully formed in his mind, but he's like, if I can just get them to Minas Tirith, like, that ring is going to be mine.
Your description of them going to Minas Tirith in the last episode has been, you know, bouncing around in my brain because you just really effectively described what a horrible choice that would be for the company.
Oh, it would lead to the end of the world.
Yeah, and but like I mean, the end of the world, like obviously, like that's the, you know, big risk, but the idea of them going there and being taken into custody and the ring being forcibly taken from Frodo,
Yeah.
you know, them being sort of imprisoned in a way
Yeah.
is so, God, it's really upsetting to me, that idea. And that's what Boromir is really, it's not just his duty and him wanting to get back home.
No.
It's truly like a evil choice to go to Minas Tirith.
Aragorn would not be recognized by
Right.
Denethor, and
Right.
they would become rivals. So either Aragorn is imprisoned or a civil war breaks out.
Yeah, I mean it's a disaster if they go to Minas Tirith. It's not just like unfortunate, you know, waylaying of the company. It's really a disaster. And so his, you know, I just appreciated how starkly you put that last time, and Boromir's actions here are are existential. This argument is not just a back and forth between Boromir and Aragorn. It's really it's the fate of the company here, I think.
Yeah. Aragorn is essentially like, hey, um, there used to be a high seat on this place called Amon Hen. And I think that if I can get there, I can see things a little bit more clearly. Like, it was put there by my and your forefathers
Mm-hmm.
as a place for clarity and perspective.
Right.
And that's where I would lead us. So if people are going to follow my lead, that's where we're going to go. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of, do you remember in our Weathertop episode, I asked, like, why the hell are they going to Weathertop?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the point? Why don't they just keep going? Like, why would they go to this high place? And I think you said at that time, it's like, well, he needs to like get a lay of the land. Like, he just needs, and that's also, it's a high place made by Aragorn's ancestors.
Yeah.
And like, there's something special about high places.
Right.
You know, you're going there to literally get a vision. And that's exactly what happens. You know, like, looking forward a little bit later, you know, Frodo sits on that seat and he is given instructions on what to do, essentially, spiritual instructions.
Yeah, he gets the full perspective and the clarity to make the choice he has to make.
The hard choice.
God, it's a horrible choice. It's just terrible that he has to
That's
make
where
this
that's where the
choice.
debate ends. Like, before, like, before they're attacked and like the fellowship is broken physically, it was broken spiritually by Boromir.
Absolutely.
And that's when the decision between East and West is made. That's when Frodo's like, all right, I have to go straight to Mordor. We're not going to pussyfoot around and, you know, strike out with force from Minas Tirith. That would be like, I've seen now, like, what that's going to lead to.
Yeah.
And I need to just go straight to Mordor. But, you know, Boromir doesn't like to hear this at all.
No.
He doesn't like to, he's rebuked by Aragorn, which, you know, a person who is proud, you know, the worst thing that can happen is someone with like more dignity and greater leadership putting them in your place.
Yeah.
And that's when Boromir, this is when Boromir, I think, really starts to show his true colors here. And like all this is where I said earlier, his true like insecurity comes out.
Yeah.
And this is when he starts to sound like a manipulative, like, boyfriend. And he says, like, it is not the way of men of Minas Tirith to desert their friends at need. And like, in his mind, he's almost saying, like, unlike what you're talking about, Aragorn.
Yeah, right. The contrast between Boromir and Aragorn here is so stark. And then we get, you know, when we get to the vision of Aragorn in his kind of kingly guise,
Yeah.
it becomes clear that Aragorn actually doesn't have to enter the city to be the king.
No, he is the
His
king.
his kingship doesn't depend on a ring, and it doesn't depend on even, force of arms or anything like that. Like, it's who he is. It's who he's destined to be.
Exactly. In Tolkien, like the king is not just somebody with a rich dad.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
you are the king because God made you the king.
Right. And so Aragorn exists, and he has this like stillness and grace about him,
Yeah.
that Boromir just doesn't. Boromir
He's
is
petulant.
He's anxious. He's grasping. He's conniving. Everything is trying to like reach for some purchase. And everyone's like, I don't need purchase. I'm standing on the ground. Even when he's in a boat, he's
Hell
like
yeah.
tall and erect, and just, you can tell that he's the guy. He's him.
He is the king.
As the kids say. So, yeah. I mean, we started off this episode talking about what's the use of this chapter, but drawing those
This is it.
comparisons there is really important.
It sets up the final choice, and it reveals Boromir's true character. I just want to read this petulant line here because I cringe reading this. You will need my strength if ever you are to reach the Tindrock. To the tall isle I will go, but no further. There I shall turn to my home, alone if my help has not earned the reward of any companionship.
Like as if he's done more than the rest of the company.
Yeah. Like, have I not earned your love? Oh.
Sam killed a orc, in Moria.
Yeah.
Merry and Pippin can carry their own boat, Boromir.
Yeah.
Right? Like, he's so, I mean, the guy
He's like, without me, this whole thing falls apart, and you guys don't appreciate it. So, and it's like, it's like, maybe the reason why I cringe so much when I read Boromir is because I recognize.
Oh yeah. Big time. When I'm really self-righteous and full of myself and convinced by my own wisdom, I'm never more like Boromir than that. Talking about waggling my finger at the world about,
You're going to miss me when I'm gone.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you're going to say like, I wish I had listened.
Right.
And it's that petulance is just it's so sad. Yeah. Ultimately, by showing his true self here and in next chapter, if he had been more reserved, if he had been calmer and like maybe held it a little closer to his chest, maybe he could have convinced him to go back to Minas Tirith. Maybe if he convinced him to go back to Minas Tirith, maybe that ring ends up on his finger.
Yeah, maybe.
So like the movement of fate, like by him whining, he actually undoes his plan. I mean, he undoes his.
Yeah, and it's perhaps the influence of the ring as well.
Yeah.
The ring itself cuts off the possibility of Boromir taking control of it because its influence on him is so great.
Yeah.
And so there's no subtlety,
No.
And so because Boromir loses subtlety, he loses his chance to be convincing. And so again, it's kind of, as you said before, it's kind of evil is its own undoing again in this way.
That's it. But Aragorn is able to convince the company to go on a little bit further to this high place. He has to do some convincing. He's like, hey, me and Legolas are going to go see if we can find this path. If we're not back in a day, choose a new leader. He doesn't say, do what Boromir says. You'll notice. He says, choose a new leader.
Yeah.
Of the people that are left, I think Boromir is probably going to end up being it. Maybe Gimli.
I think Aragorn means Frodo. I mean, right? Like, who else should it?
Frodo.
I mean, who it should be is Frodo.
Yeah.
I think, though, in that moment, if Aragorn and Legolas somehow fell, that Boromir takes over.
I think so too.
In a really ugly way.
Luckily, we were able to avoid that. They're only gone a few hours, couple of hours, and they are able to carry their boats to get back in the ocean. And that's when get back in the Anduin. Mm-hmm. And that's when we see the Argonath, which, like, I used to have figurines of the Argonath on my bookshelf.
Oh, really? Cool.
Yeah, I just think the Argonath is so cool. They're cool. They're Isildur and Anarion. They are holding out their arms with their palms out in a gesture of warning.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they're holding an axe. So cool.
It is cool. Yeah.
And they're so powerful. There's a foreboding sense of power about them, so much so that everyone but Aragorn averts their eyes. They almost can't look at them because they're so terrifying and ominous. And this is a warning. It's like, hey, if you aren't friendly to the realm of Gondor, last chance, buddy.
Yeah, there's kind of it's definitely, there's something so powerful about the ability to carve a likeness into that much rock, I mean,
it's basically impossible.
So that's part of it. And then I think
it shows how skilled the Númenóreans were.
Yeah, it shows their skill and their power, but it also shows something, I don't know, that maybe Boromir, something about the warding gesture toward the north.
Yeah.
I think there's some of that in Boromir. He's like, if it's not Gondor, I'm not into it,
Yeah.
And so there's for someone who lives outside of that realm, it's certainly not inviting. No. Only for Aragorn is it a place where there's security, or not exactly comfort, but there's like a confirmation of who he is and what his rule might be like. So, and these are like literally his ancestors, right? Like he can like draw a line through the tree straight to himself.
Yeah, and he's like, long have I desired to look on their faces. Like
he's never been there. That's wild.
No. Yeah.
Fascinating.
He's coming home, but he's never
been there.
He's never been.
Yeah.
Well, he's been in Minas Tirith before, but
right. But like this coming home is different. I mean, like the fact that there is this is the place he belongs. Even though
he's got that broken sword reforged on his side, and he's coming back to claim his seat.
Right. Yeah. Fascinating.
I love this description here. Aragorn's mind immediately turns to Gandalf in this moment.
Yeah.
Would that Gandalf were here. How my heart yearns for Minas Arnor and the walls of my own city. But whither now shall I go? So he's like, man, if Gandalf was here, I wouldn't be the leader of this company, and I could go straight there. Right. But I can't yet.
Yeah.
Whither now shall I go? And then he points to Tol Brandir, the peak, the holy peak that no human being has ever stepped upon. It says, behold, Tol Brandir, said Aragorn, pointing south to the tall peak. Upon the left stands Amon Law, and upon the right is Amon Hin, the hills of hearing and of sight. In the days of the great kings, there were high seats upon them, and watch was kept there.
I love the line, I hear the endless voice of Rauros calling. So that's the falls.
Right.
They're close enough to hear the roaring of the water, falling over the cliff.
They could go no further without the choice between the East Way and the West. The last stage of the quest was before them. Well, I think we started pretty pessimistic about this chapter, but I think it actually ended up being a pretty interesting exercise to go through it.
Yeah, I definitely warmed up to it as we talked through it. Well, thank you for reading along with us this week. We hope you'll join us next week for Book 2, Chapter 10 of Fellowship of the Ring, The Breaking of the Fellowship. This is our last chapter, folks. Wow. Thank you for following along with us. And of course, as always, if you want to help us out, share the podcast with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life. You can follow us and subscribe if you haven't already on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or the other places you find podcasts. You can leave a review. You can also subscribe on YouTube. And of course, visit waywardwizards.com for more info.
But until next time, remember that under the shadow of the Argonath, Elisar the Elfstone, son of Arathorn of the house of Elandil, Isildur's son, heir of Elendil, has naught to dread. We'll see you next week.
See ya.